The sound of Queen Kythara's roar could be heard throughout the entire ship. Her voice was full of rage and pain as she stood in the center of her command bridge. The tall alien queen had blue skin that seemed to glow under the ship's lights. Her forearms moved wildly as she shouted at her officers. "Who fixed my armor?" she roared again, but this time her voice cracked with desperation. The armor lay in pieces on a metal table in front of her. It was beautiful even when broken. The metal was dark silver and covered with strange symbols that seemed to move in the light. This was not just any armor. It was 3,000 years old and had been worn by every queen in her family line. Commander Rickle, her second in command, stepped forward carefully. He was smaller than the queen, and his green skin was pale with fear. "My queen, the armor was damaged in the last battle. The enemy weapons were stronger than we expected." Kayla Thur's eyes burned red with anger. "I know it was damaged. What I want to know is who can fix it." She picked up one of the broken pieces. The metal was cold and dead. No power flowed through it anymore. The armor was special. It did not just protect the person who wore it. It connected the queen to the spirits of all the queens who came before her. When she wore it in battle, she could feel their strength and wisdom. She could fight like 10 warriors instead of one. But now it was silent and empty. Vexel, the chief engineer, walked onto the bridge. He had 6 arms and his body looked like a giant insect. His voice made a clicking sound when he spoke. "My queen, I have studied the armor for 3 days. The damage is very bad. Can you fix it?" the queen asked. Vexel's head dropped low. "I am sorry, my queen. This armor was made by the predecessors. They lived long before any of us were born. We do not understand their technology. It is too advanced for us." The queen's fist hit the metal table with a loud bang. The sound made everyone on the bridge jump. "There must be someone who can fix it. We faced the hegemony fleet in 5 days. Without my armor, we cannot win this war." The hegemony was their enemy. They had been fighting for 2 years. The hegemony wanted to control all the star systems in this part of space. Queen Kythar's people, the Zephyrians, were the only ones strong enough to stop them, but they needed every advantage they could get. "My queen," said Dr. Nelter, the science officer, "we have tried to fix predecessor technology before. No one in the galaxy has ever succeeded. The secrets died with them long ago, deep in the lower levels of the ship." Jake Murphy was fixing a broken water pipe. He was human, which made him different from everyone else on the ship. Humans were new to space travel. Most aliens thought they were not very smart. Jake had been captured 3 months ago when his cargo ship was attacked. Instead of putting him in a prison cell, the aliens made him work. They discovered that he was very good at fixing things. Jake could look at a broken machine and understand how to repair it. This surprised the aliens because they thought humans were primitive. Jake was tall and thin with brown hair and green eyes. His hands were always dirty from working on machines. He wore simple work clothes and carried a tool bag everywhere he went. The aliens called him the human fixer because he could repair things that their own engineers could not. As Jake worked on the water pipe, he heard loud voices coming from above. The queen was shouting again. This happened often when something went wrong on the ship. Jake had learned to ignore it and focus on his work, but Today was different. He heard the word armor several times. Jake stopped working and listened more carefully. The voices were coming through the air vents that connected all parts of the ship. The predecessor armor is beyond repair. He heard someone say the quantum crystalline matrix is completely destroyed. Jake knew about quantum systems. He had worked with similar technology when he served in the human military. Not the same technology, but close enough. He had also studied old Earth legends about ancient civilizations. Some stories said that humans had traveled to the stars long ago before they forgot how to do it. Jake finished fixing the water pipe and cleaned his tools. He was curious about this armor. Predecessor technology was supposed to be impossible to understand, but Jake had noticed something during his 3 months on the ship. The aliens were very smart, but they thought in different ways than humans did. Sometimes they missed simple solutions because they were too complicated in their thinking. He decided to take a look at this armor. What was the worst that could happen? The aliens already thought humans were not very smart. If he failed, they would just think he was being foolish. Jake made his way through the ship's corridors. The Zafran ship was huge, with many levels and sections. He had learned the layout well during his months of work. He avoided the main corridors where officers walked and used the service tunnels instead. The engineering bay was on level 7. Jake had been there before to fix some equipment. He knew there was a back entrance that the engineers rarely used. He could get in and look at the armor without being noticed. When Jake reached the engineering bay, he hid behind some large machines and watched. The armor pieces were spread out on several tables. Alien engineers stood around them, looking worried and confused. They spoke in whispers, afraid that the Queen might hear them and get angry again. Jake studied the armor from his hiding place. Even broken, it was beautiful. The metal seemed to have its own inner light. Strange symbols covered every surface, but as Jake looked closer, he noticed something that made his heart beat faster. The symbols were not completely alien. Some of them looked familiar. They reminded him of ancient human writing that he had seen in museums on Earth. Not exactly the same, but similar enough to make him think. Jake waited until the engineers left for their meal break. Then he crept out of his hiding place and moved closer to the armor. When he touched one of the pieces, it felt warm under his fingers. There was still some power left in it. Deep inside, as Jake examined the armor more closely, he began to see patterns that the alien engineers had missed. The power systems were not completely alien. They worked on principles that humans understood, just built with better materials and more advanced techniques. Jake smiled for the first time in months. Maybe, just maybe, he could fix this armor after all. Jake spent the next 2 days studying the armor in secret. Every time the alien engineers left the bay, he would sneak in and examine the broken pieces. He made drawings in a small notebook he kept hidden in his tool bag. The more he looked, the more confident he became. The armor was definitely not built the way the aliens thought. Jake could see that it was designed for someone with 2 arms, not 4 like the Zapirians. The helmet was shaped for a head like his, not the larger alien heads. Even the height was wrong for most of the aliens on the ship. On the 3rd day, Jake made a decision. He waited until the morning shift change, when most of the engineers would be busy with other tasks. Then he walked into the engineering bay, openly carrying his tool bag. Vexel was standing by the armor tables, looking frustrated. His 6 arms moved in patterns that Jake had learned meant the alien was thinking hard. When Vexel saw Jake, his large eyes grew wide with surprise. Human, what are you doing here? This area is restricted, Vexel said. His voice made clicking sound that showed he was annoyed. Jake put his tool bag down and looked at the armor pieces. I heard about the problem with the Queen's armor. I think I might be able to help. Vexel's body shook, which Jake knew was the alien way of laughing. Help? You are human. Your people have barely learned to travel between stars. This armor was made by beings who conquered the galaxy before your species even existed. Maybe, Jake said calmly, but I have worked with similar systems before. Can I take a look? 2 other engineers had come over to listen. They were both different alien species that Jake did not recognize. One looked like a tall bird and the other had skin like a lizard. They both seemed amused by Jake's suggestion. Let the human try, said the bird-like engineer. What harm can it do? We have already failed to fix it. Vexel thought for a moment, then waved one of his arms. Very well, but you must not damage anything further. The Queen will have us all thrown out of the nearest airlock if you make things worse. Jake nodded and moved closer to the armor. He picked up the chest piece, which was the largest part. It was heavier than he expected, but not too heavy for him to lift. The metal felt warm and smooth in his hands. Tell me what you have tried so far, Jake said. Beakstel began to explain. They had run every test they could think of. They had tried to replace the broken crystal matrices with new ones. They had tried to bypass the damaged circuits. They had tried to restart the power core with different energy sources. Nothing worked. The neural interface is completely dead, Vexel said. Without it, the armor is just decorative metal. The Queen cannot connect to the ancestral memories that give her power in battle. Jake examined the neural interface carefully. It was a small device that would touch the wearer's head when the helmet was put on. The circuits inside were burned out, but Jake could see how they had been designed to work. This is interesting, Jake said. The neural pathways are set up for a brain structure that is very similar to human brains, not exactly the same as Zapperian brains. The lizard-like engineer hissed in disagreement. Impossible. This armor has been worn by Zapperian queens for thousands of years. Yes, Jake said, but maybe it was not originally made for Zaffrans. Maybe they learned to use it, but it was designed for someone else. Jake opened his tool bag and took out some basic equipment. He had learned to make his own tools from scraps he found around the ship. The aliens had better equipment, but they often threw away things that Jake could still use. He began to trace the power circuits in the armor. They were more complex than anything humans had built, but they followed rules that Jake understood. Electricity flowed from point A to point B. Data moved through pathways. Power had to be regulated and controlled. You are wasting your time, Vexel said. The greatest engineers in the galaxy have tried to understand predecessor technology. All have failed. Jake did not answer. He was too busy working. He found that many of the burned out circuits could be bypassed with simpler connections. The aliens had tried to Replace the exotic crystals with similar crystals, but Jake thought he could use regular electronic components to do the same job. Over the next several hours, Jake worked steadily. The alien engineers watched him with growing interest. He was not using their advanced tools or rare materials. Instead, he was using basic copper wire, simple semiconductors, and standard power regulators that could be found on any human ship. This should not work, the bird-like engineer said. You are using primitive components. Sometimes simple is better, Jake replied. Complex systems break down. Simple systems keep working. Jake had served in the human military as a field engineer. His job had been to keep equipment working in combat conditions. He had learned that fancy, complicated repairs often failed when they were needed most. Simple repairs that used common parts were more reliable. As the day went on, more aliens came to watch. Word had spread through the ship that the human was attempting to repair the predecessor armor. Some came to laugh. Others came out of curiosity. A few came because they were genuinely interested in what Jake was doing. By evening, Jake had made real progress. He had restored power to several sections of the armor. The metal began to glow with a soft inner light that it had not had since the battle. The symbols on the surface started to move and change as if they were alive. Vexetl was no longer laughing. How did you do this? We tried for weeks to restore power to those sections. I stopped trying to understand the technology and started trying to understand the problem, Jake explained. The armor is not broken because the technology is too advanced. It is broken because it has been used in ways it was not designed for. Jake showed them what he had discovered. The armor systems expected certain types of input signals from the wearer's nervous system. Zephyrian nervous systems were different from what the armor expected over thousands of years. This had caused stress on the circuits that eventually led to failure, but Zephyrian queens have worn this armor successfully for generations. The lizard-like engineer pointed out. Yes, but only because the armor was adapting itself each time. It was slowly changing its programming to work better with Zephyrian biology, but this adaptation was wearing out the core systems. Jake had found a way to reset the armor's programming back to its original settings. Then he had built interface circuits that would translate between the armor's expectations and Zephyrian biology. It was like building a translator between two different languages. The work was not finished yet. Jake estimated that he needed at least 2 more days to complete the repairs, but the progress he had made in 1 day was more than the alien engineers had accomplished in weeks. As Jake packed up his tools for the night, Vextol approached him. The alien engineer's attitude had completely changed. Human, Vextol said, I owe you an apology. I underestimated your abilities, but I must ask you something. How did you know to approach the problem this way? Jake thought for a moment before answering. Where I come from, we have a saying, if you want to understand something, think about who made it and why they made it. This armor was made by someone who thought like I do, so I tried to think like they did. That night, as Jake lay in his small quarters, he thought about what he had discovered. The armor was clearly made by beings who were very similar to humans, too similar for it to be a coincidence. But what did that mean? Had humans really traveled to the stars in ancient times? Were the predecessors Actually human ancestors, Jake did not have answers to these questions yet, but he was determined to find out tomorrow. He would continue working on the armor. And maybe, just maybe, he would discover secrets that had been hidden for thousands of years. Jake worked through the night. He could not sleep because his mind was full of questions about the armor. When the morning shift began, he was already in the engineering bay continuing his repairs. The neural interface was the most important part. Without it, the Queen would not be able to connect with the armor's memory systems. Jake had rebuilt most of the circuits, but something was still not working correctly. As he worked deeper into the armor systems, Jake found something that made his hands shake with excitement. There were data files buried deep in the armor's memory core. These were not just operating instructions, they were actual recordings from previous users. Jake carefully accessed one of the files. Voice began to speak, but not in any alien language he had heard on the ship. The voice sounded human. The words were in an old form of Earth's common language, but Jake could understand most of what was being said. Day 47 of the Siege of Ketharin. The enemy has broken through our outer defenses. I fear this may be my last entry. If anyone finds this record, know that we fought with honor. The armor has served me well, as it served my mother and her mother before her. Jake sat back in shock. Human had made this recording, but that was impossible. The armor was thousands of years old. Humans had only been traveling in space for less than 100 years. Jake accessed more files. There were dozens of them going back thousands of years. The oldest ones were clearly made by humans, but as he moved forward in time, the voices changed. They became Zephyrian voices, speaking in the alien language he heard every day. On the ship, Jake realized what had happened long ago. Humans had owned this armor. Somehow it had passed to the Zephyrians, and they had used it for their own purposes, but they never knew its true origin. Jake needed to talk to someone about this discovery, but who would believe him? The aliens already thought humans were primitive. They would never accept that humans had once been advanced enough to create technology like this. Then Jake remembered Lisa Chang. She was another human who had been captured from the same cargo ship. The aliens had put her to work in their archives, cataloging ancient artifacts and documents. If anyone could help him understand what he had found, it would be Lisa. Jake finished his work for the day and went to find Lisa. The archive section was on level 12, deep in the ship's interior. It was quiet there, filled with shelves of ancient items and data storage devices. Lisa was sitting at a desk, carefully examining a small crystal tablet. She was a few years older than Jake, with black hair and intelligent brown eyes. She had been a professor of alien archaeology on Earth before she was captured. Jake, Lisa said when she saw him, "What brings you down to the dusty archives?" Jake looked around to make sure no aliens were nearby. Then he sat down next to Lisa and spoke in a low voice. "I need to show you something," he said, "but you have to promise not to think I have gone crazy." Lisa smiled. "After 3 months on this ship, nothing would surprise me anymore." "What did you find?" Jake told Lisa about the armor and the repairs he was making. Then he played one of the human voice recordings on a small device he had built. Lisa listened to the Recording twice, her face grew pale with shock. Jake, do you understand what this means? I think so, but I want to hear what you think first. Lisa stood up and began pacing around the small room. I have been studying Zapirian history since I was put to work. Here they have legends about finding the armor on an abandoned world. They called it Carthus, which means the empty place in their old language. When did they find it? Jake asked. About 3,000 years ago. They were exploring new star systems and found a planet with ruins of an advanced civilization. Most of the technology was destroyed, but they found the armor in a sealed vault. Jake felt his heart beating faster. What happened to the people who built the ruins? No one knows. The Zapirians found evidence of a great war that destroyed the civilization. They assumed it was an alien species that had died out long before they arrived. Lisa sat down again and looked directly at Jake. But what if it was not an alien species? What if it was humans? Jake nodded. That is what I am thinking too. But how is that possible? Humans were still living in caves 3,000 years ago. Maybe not all humans, Lisa said thoughtfully. What if some humans left Earth long ago and built a civilization among the stars? Then something happened and the survivors had to return to Earth and start over. Lisa went to one of the archive shelves and pulled out several data crystals. I have been cataloging predecessor artifacts for months. I never paid much attention to them before because they were supposedly from an unknown alien race, but now I want to look at them again. They spent the next several hours examining predecessor artifacts and records. The more they looked, the more convinced they became that the predecessors had been human. Many of the artifacts were tools and weapons designed for human-sized hands. Computer interfaces used symbols that were similar to ancient human writing systems. Even the architectural plans showed buildings designed for human proportions. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to a star map. This shows the locations of predecessor colonies. There are markers for dozens of star systems. Jake studied the map. Earth is marked on here too, but it is marked as a frontier colony, not the home world, which means the predecessors came from somewhere else originally, Lisa said, but they had been human long enough to colonize Earth as well. As they worked, Jake continued to access more memory files from the armor. The human voices told a story of a great civilization that had spread across many star systems. They had advanced technology and powerful weapons. They had been explorers and warriors, but something had gone wrong. The later files spoke of a terrible war that had torn the civilization apart. Different human colonies had fought each other using weapons that could destroy entire planets. The war had lasted for decades and left most of their worlds in ruins. The final human recording in the armor's memory was heartbreaking too. Here, the evacuation ships are leaving for Earth today. We are destroying all records of our technology to prevent it from being used for war again. Maybe someday our descendants will be wise enough to use this knowledge for peace instead of destruction. Jake and Lisa looked at each other in silence. They had uncovered one of the greatest secrets in galactic history. Humans had not just recently learned to travel between stars, they had done it before. Thousands of years ago, they had built a great civilization and then destroyed it through war. We have to be careful who we tell about this, Lisa said. Some aliens might not react well to learning that humans were once the dominant species in this part of the galaxy. Jake agreed, but he also knew that this knowledge could be important for the future if humans really were the descendants of the predecessors. Then they might be able to understand and use predecessor technology better than anyone else. I need to finish repairing the armor first, Jake said. But after that we should search for more evidence if there are other predecessor sites out there. Maybe we can learn more about what really happened. Lisa nodded. I will keep studying the artifacts here. There might be more clues hidden in the archives. As Jake prepared to return to the engineering bay, Lisa grabbed his arm. Jake, be careful. If you can really make that armor work again, the Queen is going to want to know how you did it. We need to have a plan for what to tell. Sorry. Jake had been so focused on solving the technical problems that he had not thought about the political implications of his discovery. Queen Kathara was proud of her heritage and her family's warrior tradition, learning that her most precious artifact was actually made by humans might not make her happy. I will think of something, Jake said. First, let me see if I can actually get it working, then we will worry about explaining how I did it. Jake returned to the engineering bay with his mind full of new knowledge. The armor was not just a piece of alien technology, it was a link to humanity's forgotten past. As he continued his work, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He was not just fixing a broken machine. He was awakening memories that had been sleeping for thousands of years, and once those memories were awakened, nothing would ever be the same again. Jake worked for 2 more days on the armor. Each time he fixed one system, it revealed problems in another system, but slowly, piece by piece, the ancient armor began to come alive again. The symbols on the metal surface glowed brighter than they had in centuries. The power core hummed with steady energy. The neural interface responded to Jake's test signals, but Jake knew the real test would come when someone actually wore the armor. On the 5th day, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Jake looked up from his work to see alien officers running through the corridors. He heard shouts about enemy ships and battle preparations. Commander Rickshel's voice came over the ship's communication system. All crew to battle stations. The hegemony fleet has found us. We have 1 hour before they arrive. Jake felt his stomach drop. Armor was almost ready, but not completely finished. Some systems still needed fine-tuning. The neural interface was working, but Jake had not been able to test it properly. Bixel rushed into the engineering bay, his 6 arms moving frantically. Human, how much more time do you need? At least 6 more hours for a complete repair, Jake said. Maybe 2 hours for basic function. We do not have 2 hours. Vexel said. The Queen needs her armor now. Before Jake could respond, the bay door slid open and Queen Ka strode in. She was wearing her regular battle gear, but Jake could see the worry in her red eyes. Behind her came a group of royal guards and military officers. Show me, the Queen said simply. Jake gestured to the armor, which was laid out on the tables. It looked much better than it had a week ago. The metal gleamed with inner light, and the symbols moved in slow, hypnotic patterns. The Queen approached the armor carefully. She reached out and touched the chest piece with one of her 4 hands. The metal responded to her touch, glowing brighter. For a moment, it feels different, she said. Stronger, more alive. The power systems are fully restored. Jake explained, the neural interface is working, most of the memory functions have been repaired, but I have not had time to test everything. Queen Kathera looked at Jake with an expression he could not read. You have done what our greatest engineers could not do. How? Jake had been dreading this question. He could not tell the Queen that her precious armor was actually made by humans, but he also could not lie to her. The armor was designed by minds. That thing like mine, Jake said. Carefully, I approached the problem from a different angle than your engineers did. The Queen studied Jake's face as if trying to read his thoughts. You speak as if you understand the builders of this armor. I understand some things about how they worked, Jake said. They built things to last, but they also built them to be repaired. They wanted their technology to survive, even if they did not. The ship shook suddenly as enemy weapons struck the shields. The battle had begun earlier than expected. My Queen, Commander Rickall said urgently, we must retreat or fight now. We cannot wait any longer. Queen Ka looked at the armor, then at Jake. If I wear this armor and it fails, I will die. If I do not wear it, my people will lose this battle, and many will die anyway. She began removing her regular armor. With the help of her guards, human, you will stay here during the battle. If the armor malfunctions, you must try to fix it while I'm wearing it. Jake nodded. Even though he was terrified, he had never worked on equipment during a battle before, and he had definitely never worked on armor while someone was wearing it. The guards helped the Queen put on the ancient armor. Each piece clicked into place with a satisfying sound. When the helmet was lowered over her head, the entire suit began to glow with brilliant light. Queen Kayla stood still for a moment with her eyes closed. Jake watched nervously as the neural interface activated. Lights flowed across the helmet's surface as the armor connected with the Queen's mind. Suddenly, the Queen's eyes snapped open. But they were no longer red. They glowed with the same silver light as the armor. When she spoke, her voice was different too. It was deeper and more powerful than before. I can feel them, she whispered, all the queens who wore this armor before me. Their knowledge, their strength, their courage, but there are others too. Older voices, voices that speak in languages I do not recognize. Jake knew she was hearing the human voices from the armor's memory files, but the Queen did not understand what those voices were. The ship shook again, more violently this time. My Queen, we must go, Commander Rixell said. Queen Kayla. Thor nodded and walked toward the door. But as she moved, Jake noticed something wrong. The armor's power distribution was uneven. Too much energy was flowing to the weapon systems and not enough to the protective shields. Wait, Jake called out. The Queen stopped and turned back to him. There is a problem with the power balance. The armor is trying to provide more offensive capability than defensive protection. That is not what you need for this battle. Jake ran to a control panel and began making adjustments. The armor was responding to the Queen's emotional state. She was angry and wanted to attack the enemy, but the hegemony had superior numbers. The Queen needed to focus on defense and tactics, not just raw aggression. I am adjusting the armor's priorities, Jake explained as he worked. It will give you better shields and enhanced strategic thinking instead of maximum weapon power. The Queen felt the changes immediately. The burning desire To charge into battle was replaced by a cool, calculating intelligence. She could see the tactical situation more clearly. Better, she said, much better. You understand this armor. Ways that even I do not. The Queen and her guards left for the battle. Jake remained in the engineering bay, monitoring the armor's performance. Through the ship's computer systems, he could see data flowing between the armor and the ship's sensors. The Queen was not just wearing the armor, she was connected to the entire ship through it. The battle was fierce. Jake watched on. The tactical displays as hegemony ships surrounded the Zephyrian fleet. The enemy had twice as many ships and more powerful weapons. Under normal circumstances, the Zephyrians would have been destroyed quickly, but Queen Cathara was fighting like no Zephyrian Queen had fought in centuries. The armor was giving her abilities that she had never had before. She could process information from hundreds of sources at once. She could coordinate the movements of dozens of ships simultaneously. She could predict enemy actions and counter them before they happened. Jake continued to make small adjustments to the armor systems throughout the battle. When the Queen needed more processing power for fleet coordination, he shifted energy from the physical enhancement systems. When she needed to board an enemy ship personally, he boosted the armor's protection and weapon systems. It was like conducting an orchestra. Every system in the armor had to work in harmony with every other system, and Jake was the conductor, making sure that the Queen had exactly what she needed at exactly the right moment. The tide of battle began to turn. Zephyrian ships that should have been destroyed were surviving and fighting back. Enemy formations that should have been effective were being disrupted and defeated. The hegemony commanders could not understand what was happening. Finally, after 6 hours of fighting, the hegemony fleet retreated. They had lost more ships than they had destroyed, which should have been impossible given their numerical advantage. Queen Cathara returned to the engineering bay. After the battle, she was exhausted but victorious. The armor had performed better than anyone had dared to hope. Human, she said to Jake, you have not just repaired my armor, you have transformed it. It is more powerful now than it has ever been. Jake felt proud and worried at the same time. He had succeeded in fixing the armor, but he had also awakened capabilities that the Zephyrians had never known existed. What would happen when other aliens learned about this? What would happen when they discovered the truth about the armor's origins? My Queen, Jake said carefully, there are things about this armor that you should know, things that might change how you think about it. Queen Cathara removed her helmet and looked at Jake with tired but curious eyes. Tell me. Queen Cathara stood in the engineering bay, still wearing the ancient armor. The battle was over, but the armor continued to glow with power that seemed almost alive. Jake could see that she was different. Now, the connection with the armor had changed her somehow. Tell me what you have discovered, the Queen said. Her voice was calmer than Jake had ever heard it. Jake looked around the bay. Several alien engineers were present, along with some of the Queen's guards. This was not the right place for such a conversation. My Queen, what I have to tell you might be difficult to hear. Perhaps we should speak privately. Queen Cathara nodded and dismissed her guards and the other engineers. Only she and Jake remained in the bay. Jake took a deep breath and began. When I repaired The armor I found memory files buried. Deep in its systems, these files contain recordings from everyone who has ever worn the armor. Yes, the queen said. Voices of my ancestors, I heard them. During the battle, some of the voices were your ancestors, Jake said. Carefully, but the oldest voices were not Zahirian, they were human. Queen's forearms tensed and her red eyes began to glow with anger. That is impossible. This armor has been in my family for 3,000 years. It is a symbol of Zephyrian power and heritage. Jake had expected this reaction. He activated a small device and played one of the human voice recordings. The ancient voice spoke in Old Earth language, telling of battles and victories from long ago. Queen Kayla Thera listened in silence. When the recording ended, she sat down heavily on one of the workbenches. How can this be? She asked quietly. Jake explained what he and Lisa had discovered. He told her about the evidence they had found that the predecessors were actually ancient humans. He explained how the armor had been designed for human physiology and then adapted for Zephyrian use over thousands of years. Your people found this armor on a ruined world, Jake said. But they did not find alien ruins. They found the remains of a human civilization that had destroyed itself through war. The queen was silent for a long time. Jake could see her struggling with this information. Everything she had believed about her heritage was being challenged. Finally she spoke. If what you say is true, then my people have been living a life for 3,000 years. Not a lie, Jake said. Your people took something that was abandoned and gave it new life. Zephyrian queens have worn this armor with honor for generations. They have used it to protect their people and fight for justice. That is not a lie. That is worthy of respect. Queen Kythe looked at Jake with new understanding. And that is why you could repair it when no one else could. Because you are the same species as the ones who built it. Jake nodded. I think so. The technology made sense to me. Because it was designed by minds like mine, but it took Zephyrian courage and warrior spirit to make it truly powerful. The queen stood up and began pacing around the bay. The armor's symbols shifted and moved as her emotions changed. What do you want in return for this knowledge? She asked. And for repairing my armor. Jake had been thinking about this question for days. I want my freedom and the freedom of Lisa Chang and the other humans who were captured with me, but I also want something else. What? I want to search for other predecessor sites. If there are more ruins out there, we might be able to learn what really happened to the ancient human civilization, and we might be able to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. Queen Kathara considered this request. Jake could see that she was thinking not just as a warrior now, but as a leader who had to make decisions for her entire people. You realize what you are asking, she said. If word of this spreads, it will change how every species in the galaxy thinks about humans. Your people will no longer be seen as primitive newcomers. Maybe that is not a bad thing, Jake said. Humans have something to offer the galaxy. We see problems differently than other species. We find solutions that others miss, but we also make mistakes that others might help us avoid. The queen stopped pacing and looked directly at Jake. During the battle, I felt the armor's full power. For the first time, it was not just Zirian strength that flowed through it. There was something else, something that Felt like curiosity, like a desire to understand and explore. And build. That sounds very human, Jake said with a small smile. Queen Kalithara smiled back, which surprised Jake. He had never seen her smile before. Human Jake. Murphy, she said formally, you have done something that no engineer in the galaxy has been able to do. You have not just repaired my armor, you have made it better than it ever was before. The Queen began removing the armor with Jake's help. As each piece was taken off, it continued to glow with residual power. I offer you a position as my Chief Technology Advisor, the Queen continued. You will have resources to search for predecessor sites and study their technology. In return, you will help my people understand and use what we find. Jake felt excited but also worried. What about the other aliens? The galaxy, some of them might not be happy to learn that humans once ruled the stars. Then we will deal with them, as we always have, the Queen said with courage and honor, but we will also deal with them with wisdom, which is something the ancient humans seem to have lacked. Jake agreed to the Queen's offer. Over the following weeks, word spread throughout the Zion fleet about the human engineer who had repaired the impossible. Jake found himself working with alien scientists and engineers who were eager to learn from his different perspective. Lisa was brought up from the archives to work with Jake on studying predecessor artifacts. Together, they began to piece together the true history of humanity's first galactic civilization. They learned that the ancient humans had been great explorers and builders. They had colonized hundreds of worlds and created wonders of technology and art, but they had also been proud and competitive. Different human colonies had developed different cultures and beliefs. Eventually, these differences had led to conflicts that grew into devastating wars. The final war had been so terrible that the survivors had made a desperate decision. They would return to Earth and destroy all records of their advanced technology. They hoped that humanity would eventually return to the stars, but only when they were wise enough to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Jake and Lisa shared their discoveries with Queen Ka and her advisors. The Zapirians were fascinated by this lost chapter of galactic history. They began to see humans not as primitive beings who had recently discovered space travel, but as a species that was returning to reclaim their place among the stars. 6 months after the battle, Jake stood on the bridge of a Zapirian exploration ship. They were traveling to Carthus, the world where the armor had first been found. Queen Kathara had decided to mount an expedition to search for more predecessor ruins. Lisa was with him, along with a team of alien archaeologists and engineers. They were all working together, combining human intuition with alien knowledge and technology. Are you ready for this? Lisa asked as their ship entered orbit around the ancient world. Jake looked down at the planet through the viewing screen. Somewhere on that world were the ruins of a human city that had died thousands of years ago, but now humans were returning to learn from the past and build a better future. Yes, Jake said, I think it is time for humans to remember who we used to be and, more importantly, to decide who we want to become. Queen Kaith joined them at the viewing screen. She was wearing the repaired armor which had become her preferred outfit for important occasions. The armor seemed to approve of this mission. Its symbols glowed brighter whenever they discussed plans. For exploring the ruins, who fixed my armor? The Queen said quietly, repeating the question that had started. Everything, but now she was not roaring it in anger, she was asking it with pride and gratitude. Jake smiled. A human did, but not just any human, a human who had help from Zapirian courage, alien wisdom, and the memories of all those who came before. As their ship descended toward the planet's surface, Jake felt the weight of history and the promise of the future. Humanity was returning to the stars, but this time they would not travel alone. They would travel with allies who could help them avoid the mistakes of the past. The armor had been broken by ancient conflicts, but it had been repaired by cooperation and understanding. Jake hoped that humanity's return to galactic civilization would follow the same pattern. They would learn from their failures and build something better with the help of friends among the stars. Exploration of Carthus would reveal many more secrets about humanity's forgotten past. But the most important discovery had already been made. Humans and aliens could work together, combining their different strengths to achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Jake Murphy, the human engineer who had fixed the impossible, was ready to help his species reclaim their place in the galaxy, and this time they would do it right.